Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called The Baker and the Thief, written by Dr. Blackjack 21. The streets were busy, meaning this was a perfect time to strike. Ammon leaned over the smaller kid next to him. "Now say, how the baker, gosh, has his tables fully loaded and is shouting at everyone. This is the time to strike. Just watch for the signal and remember, once we get moving, try to keep up. You mess up once and it's all over." The poor kid looked white as a sheet and looked ready to bolt and run at any moment. Maybe Ammon had oversold the danger. After all, the baker had to be the slowest, most stupid baker on the face of the earth. He was the natural-born sucker. However, it was too late to say anything now. Eric was making his move. Eric walked up, all nonchalant as he examined the bread. Too nonchalant. It was obvious that he was planning something, and even the baker seemed to see. The oversized man waved a finger, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "Hey, you! Yeah, you, kid! Don't you get any funny ideas? Got an eye on you." Eric held up his hand, so it was clear that he wasn't doing anything as he stammered an excuse. Of course, Ammon didn't get to hear what Eric had to say this time, because that was the signal. Ammon leapt up and grabbed 3 loaves of bread, then turned and started running for the alley. It didn't take the baker long to figure out what was happening. "Hey, you little thief! You can't get away from me! I'm gonna catch you this time!" This was the tricky part. If Ammon or the kid were too slow, the baker would see where the hole in the fence was. Thankfully, the kid had listened well and was a few paces ahead of Ammon. The kid dove headfirst through the hole, followed closely by Ammon, who slid in after. Jewel, who had been waiting, dropped the plank over the hole just in time. A moment later, they could hear the baker shouting as he rounded the corner. "Get back here, you little rats! You won't get away forever. Sooner or later, I'm going to catch you." Ammon and the kid just sat there catching their breath as the baker ranted a bit longer, stifling their laughter. The guy was never going to catch them. He was too slow and too stupid. It was almost too easy. After the baker left, Ammon broke up the loaves and passed the bread around to everyone. Eric, who was coming in through the back, grinned as he got his cut. "Man, I can't believe he never learns." Ammon shook his head. Don't be too hard on the guy. We are just that good. I never stood a chance." Everyone was laughing. Everyone was except Will, the new kid. Not sure what was bothering him. Ammon poked him in the side. "What's wrong, Will? Eat your bread. You earned it." Will looked at his food half-heartedly, then turned to Ammon. "Do you have to go? I don't know if we can pull this off without you." Ammon grinned and messed up Will's hair. "It'll be fine. I just got scared when it was my turn to be the runner. But that baker is so slow he'll never caught me, and he'll never catch you. Besides, this place is too small for the likes of me. I gotta go out there and make my fortunes. One day you'll hear tales about my master thief Ammon, and you'll be able to say that you knew that guy." Eric snorted. "If people are hearing about your name as a master thief, it means that you did a rotten job. Besides, with your smelly feet, they'll track you down in no time." The kids laughed, and Ammon laughed with them. Nothing could spoil his mood. He'd been waiting for this day for a long time. No one could stop him now. When most thieves sneak into a town, they try to blend into the shadows or hide their faces. But when a master thief does so, he does it in broad daylight with a smile on his lips and a coin on his hip. There is no reason to suspect a successful merchant, especially one who might spend some much-needed coin in your village. The guards even called him my lord as they checked his paperwork. Paperwork he forged himself just a couple of nights ago. Of course, he'd weathered it to make it look well used. Nothing was more suspicious than brand new paperwork, after all. As Ammon walked down an old familiar street, he smiled. For once, he wasn't looking around for a mark. He was just taking in the sights. After all, this was where it all started. Stealing bread on the streets of the sleepy town. At first, life in the big cities had been more challenging than he'd thought. Not many of his small-town tricks had worked on the hardened people in the cities. But eventually, he'd done it. He became that master thief he'd always bragged he'd be. Not long ago, Ammon pulled the biggest heist of his career, taking everything out from under the feet of a fat parrot who'd stolen more out of the pockets of his serfs than even Ammon could walk away with. Now that the Baron was in the king's custody, Some mysterious informant had leaked documents detailing all the profits he'd been skimming from the royal treasury. Of course, that informant had done his best to weigh down his own pockets first and now needed a place to lay low for a while, and the sleepy little town seemed just about perfect. As he walked down the street, Ammon was amazed at how little had changed. There was an old carpentry shop, the butcher, and even a little old lady selling flowers, a little older now that Ammon remembered, but he still bought one with a smile and a wink. The little lady bowed and thanked him as he walked on his way when he suddenly saw him, Gus, the baker, still hawking his wares. Ammon decided at this time he'd actually pay for the taste of that bread. But before he could, he saw a kid walk out, acting nonchalant while obviously trying to draw attention to himself. Nearby crouched another kid, obviously waiting for the signal. Had Ammon ever been so obvious? He shook his head. These kids were pushing their luck, even with old Gus. Ammon positioned himself to get a good view of the show and to step in if things went south. However, apparently, luck was on their side because Gus took a bait and shouted at the first kid, "Hey you kid, don't get any funny ideas. Got my eye on you." The second kid ran out and grabbed the bread, but he was way too clumsy and obvious. There was no way he'd get away in time. However, the years had taken their time on old Gus because he was even slower chasing the kids than he used to be. And the kids got around the corner in time. Sure enough, they dove through the same hole in the fence, but they did so too clumsily. The fence was shaking, and they dropped a plank too late. Gus had seen everything. Gus walked up to the fence. He was eyeing the hole. It was clear these kids were out of luck. Or at least they would be if Ammon wasn't there. The thief got ready to knock the old baker out. He wouldn't be too hard on the guy. It's not like Gus was some robber baron or anything. But these kids deserved a chance to learn from their mistakes. However, just as Ammon was getting into position, Gus, who was looking at the hole while shaking his head, started shouting, "Get back here, you little rats! You won't get away forever! Sooner or later, I'm gonna get you!" Gus's delivery was awful and wouldn't fool anyone who saw him. He knew exactly where those kids had gone, and even if he didn't, the sound of the kids laughing on the other side of the fence gave it away. But rather than make any more of a scene out of it, old Gus just started ambling back to his stall with a massive grin, like he was in on some kind of great joke. Gus walked back to his shop with a smile on his lips and a spring in his step. Those kids always brightened his day. Some villagers said that he shouldn't let them get away with things like that, but Gus just shook his head. He knew better, and if someone pushed the issue, he just pointed to Will, the woodcutter, or Eric, the innkeeper, and followed up with the same old phrase. Hungry kids can grow into responsible adults if you give them a chance. This batch was slightly less subtle than the others had been, but that was fine. It was probably meant that they could all be more honest when the time came. They just needed a chance, that's all. Thinking back, only one group ever stuck out in his mind. One kid had been quick enough and smooth enough to slip past Gus legitimately one time or two. Unfortunately, that kiddo disappeared one day, and Gus never knew what had happened to him. As Gus sat down to continue selling what was left, he paused. A leather pouch was sitting where the stolen bread had been. Gus looked around to see if anyone had left it, but no one seemed interested. Figuring maybe someone had left payment while playing his game with the kids, Gus opened the pouch, only to have a small pile of gold coins fall out. That was more than he'd make in a year. Now Gus was really worried. Someone had obviously made a mistake. He looked around into the crowd, but still no one caught his eye. Then he noticed there was a small piece of paper in the pouch. Wondering if it might offer some clue as to who it belonged to, Gus fished it out. There was only one sentence on the scrap paper. Back pay for a childhood of fun and bread. End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 peeps, Dragon Soup, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Red Panda 121, Leslie 517, Bushmaster 177, Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Sans the Skeleton, Light Jock, Dragzoon WRE, and Lord Azrakal. Thank you very much.